no, I hope you enjoyed the little introduction, and yeah, I hope you have even more questions than before. So let us now start the Q&A session. Do you have any questions? Does anyone want to be the first? If you don't, I can also kick off, and I've got a few questions prepared. All right, so probably a generic question to everyone of our panel. So what does LCA mean for your organization? Why do you bother at all, right? When it's not required, why do you do LCA? Because in each of your organizations, LCAs are done. Just let us know what is the view of your organization on that.
So at Jacobs, LCA is a tool for us to help meet our corporate commitments. So Jacob have a few global strategies, and one of them is our sustainability strategy called Plan Beyond. And there they recognise decarbonisation as a strategic focus. And there's a big emphasis on using transformational technologies, as they've named it. And I reckon LCA is one of those critical technologies because it just gives us that high resolution of where carbon's actually coming from. And when we talk about decarbonisation, the end goal is to be net zero, but we need to know the starting point of how much carbon we actually need to sort of eliminate, reduce and offset and so on. So LCAs sort of allow us to meet those commitments and those targets that we've set.
Thanks, Rebecca.
On that, we're the same way. We need a starting point, and without that starting point, you can't make any changes. But it's also an avenue for us to make data-driven changes. So not just changing because something sounds cool and you want to try this new technology, but is that actually fit for purpose for your project? Making sure that the cost is there, the benefits are actually there, and that we'll deliver something to the client that they're proud of, and that we can show that we've provided a lasting legacy.
And at Mott McDonald, we've got the Mortar carbon portal, which also helps facilitate discussions and design changes around carbon. But LCAs in general, they provide that extra data set, if you like, about a project or about a decision or about a design change that gives you that information to make more of an informed choice about what the better options are. And that's been really critical in providing like a tangible example or way of communicating to project teams and the organisation about carbon.
Yeah, similar to what Sandra said, I guess, at least in my experience previously, before, I guess, LCA was looked at properly, projects made decisions based on what a material might look like, if it feels good. There was no real data behind a decision that was being made, but I guess once you use LCA in the design process and I guess in the construction process, you really get the data that tells you exactly what material is reduced by how much in terms of its embodied carbon, in terms of when you actually put it on site. So it just really improves that decision-making process right from the start, and to those people who are making those important decisions on what material goes in the ground. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's good to see that LCA is being recognized and you already use it. Although it's embedded into design process, and it really helps to drive decisions. And in fact, like lots of organizations even create their own LCA tools. From spreadsheets up to sophisticated software. So I guess the more we have this tangible and really good tools, the better we are equipped. So for sure. All right, well, the next question is, what are the phases of design when it's worth doing an LCA at all? Well, you've got, or maybe Brian would like to answer this one.
In the tender, at the very beginning, it needs to be done. That's critical, because if you don't do it early enough, you're going to miss opportunities. You're going to not be able to implement innovations, and you're not going to be able to get the people on board to set aside the money to trial something new or to implement a new program that you haven't looked at previously. And without that data, you can't convince them. And so it's very much a just trust me, but now I have empirical data that I can show to you that this will reduce our carbon emissions.
Does anyone else wants to add to this?
I'd probably speak from the planning perspective of infrastructure jobs as well. I think there's also a benefit to do some form of high-level LCA of materials or the entire project at that phase, particularly because it could be used as a tool to help shape the organisation's approach to planning and delivering the project. So it doesn't even have to be a driver for sustainability. If they've got a commitment to consider whole-of-life costs for the whole project, the LCA process can support that as well, because you can tie the costs of the project and the impacts of decisions throughout the whole life cycle from that phase as well. And it also starts to prep the organisations and the whole way it gets delivered in that life cycle assessment frame of mind. So there's certainly a benefit to, have those conversations and begin implementing LCAs from that stage as well.
Yeah, I agree fully. It's very. Sorry, do you have a question as well? Yeah, sure. That's good. Yeah, I just wanted to comment that. We generally recommend everyone to do LCA as early as possible, even if you don't have the right documentation, right? And you say, well, hold on, I don't even have my energy model done. That's already too late, almost, right? So it's better to start as early as possible to really have, more options open for discussion, because it also requires, to engage with your supply chain and with your client. So the earlier the better, and don't worry about the data and the results. Like even if you have some assumptions that you have to make, it's still better to do a life cycle assessment to identify those hotspots, areas. We call them hot carbon areas of your design that really drive that change and that they are carbon intense. And when you know where they are, then you can focus and target certain portions of your project, certain stages, and then trial different ideas. So this way it's going to be much more effective too.
Yeah, my question, and I'd just be interested in the any of the panel experience around having those conversations with design engineers, construction engineers who are unfamiliar with the sustainability agenda. What are some of the successful ways that you found to, really kind of engage and to? I think we've all probably experienced as sustainability professionals levels of resistance amongst the teams that we've worked with, but over time, we've seen that change. And I'd just be interested in any particular initiatives that you've taken or approaches that have been really successful.
So what I've seen for some projects is just the integration of some processes like LCAs or sustainability assessments in the DE models for projects, really, even in the planning phase. Even if it's just to extract quantities or derive quantities for the project, that just seems to cut through. It just makes the connection between a concept of sustainability or reducing carbon a bit more tangible to engineers, because they are designing the project by extracting quantities from it. They can see that their design leads to that much tonnes of concrete or tonnes of carbon. So that's been a really powerful way to cut through to the engineers and to show them and communicate to them how they can influence the design. The other thing I have seen is just seeing commitments from the organisation about their approach to sustainability or carbon or net zero, and having that directive from the start shape the process for how the project gets considered and designed, because that'll just flow through the whole life cycle.
In that, we've also used LCAs as a communication tool to our design teams, to our engineers. It speaks their language. They can see a direct effect of, we switched this piece of material out, here's the outcome. It's not, let me go back, try to fiddle with the spreadsheet, figure it out, and come back to them 2 weeks later. They can see it immediately, so we can use it as a way to both educate them and make them feel comfortable that they can ask questions. They can, we can just play around with the numbers to see, well, what happens when we do this type of material? What's this part of it? And then they can just play around and use their engineering brain to start figuring out, well, how can we actually do that then, if that's going to get us the best outcome for the project? And I think, Jacob, you've had that on your project a bit.
Yeah, one of the biggest things, I guess, is the option evaluation. So when you're literally looking at two choices, what to pick between. I've had instances where engineers come over and say, hey, this is a really cool product. What would it look like if we implemented it compared to the usual case? And I've been able to sit down with them, go through an LCA and say, this is literally the difference. Or there's been instances where that's worked in a good way, where their idea has come up and I've said, yeah, this actually reduces our embodied carbon footprint. And same vice versa. It might be a really good product, but potentially it's transported from the bush, essentially, a country, like really, really long distances. So it actually turns out to be worse overall. They're probably the best time to influence that decision-making process.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I just put this slide to visualize basically how it can be done, where you have a scenarios tree of the same design, and you can see how each decision helps you to reduce carbon of the project holistically. So it can be really anything. It can be lighting. It can be, working with local suppliers. Change the transport ways. It could be swapping one material for another. How would you know, how impactful that is without doing an LCA? How would you know? It's just guessing, or what other tools are you using? I'm always wondering what else is available there. But with that, you really have that tangibility that everyone is talking about here, and you just know, right? If you have discussions, you have numbers, facts. And then you also can discuss the cost. We're just cognizant of time, so probably we'll take one more question. And David has been first, sorry.
Just after some practical examples, so you've done the LCA, what else are examples where you made a decision based on that?
Yeah, thanks.
I guess I could give at least one good example. Hopefully I can talk about this one. Essentially, we were looking at a job, and it was a discussion about precast concrete and the supplier we were looking at, and levels of cement replacement or SEM percentages. So originally we were just looking at the local precast yard, and that was our kind of base case. And then we looked at a precast yard that could offer really high SEM, but it was in regional Victoria, and the transport distances for bulk material was ruining essentially what the life cycle impacts, the benefits essentially from the other option. I guess that was probably a really good example, like that. It's not necessarily just because it looks good, just because it's maybe business as usual for, I guess, sustainability practitioners to decide on sustainable alternative, but if you look into the detail behind it, it's not necessarily the best way to do it. So yeah, sometimes it needs a bit more digging.
I've used it to model scenarios like the picture above, and you can test out the % savings of very specific changes that you want to make. So if you know where your specific supplier is, you can model that transport distance, or if you know what % SEM you're targeting versus what they've currently got, you can model that as well. And those savings I've sort of leveraged as, I've used them as leverage to get those initiatives implemented. So a couple of the things we are trying to push for is 70% SEM in piles at the moment. And there's so many others that just little tiny things here and there, and they add up to savings.
Thanks so much, guys. Do we still have time for one more question? Or
Very quick one.
one quick one? Does anyone have a question? Are you waiting?
So hypothetically, I would graduate. Hypothetically.
Yes.
And I'm really interested in LCA. What is your advice for me to say get better?
Great question. All right, let's go.
I'd probably start with doing the eTool training. No, it genuinely explains the whole entire process. It explains the standards, how to use the tool, and so on.
Free training, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really got me interested and solidified my that I was keen to do LCAs as well.
I was just going to say, what I find useful for anything really is talking to someone who's walked the path. So, finding a mentor, doing the appropriate training is a good way to get equipped on a technical sense. But I also think it's worth, whether it's a specific project or client or even just the state that you're working in, just getting a little bit of background and context from legislation or from client strategies about what their positions are on sustainability, net zero, LCAs. Because if you see those types of words littered around their plans, that's important to them in some respect, and then you can offer LCA as a process to help them support that.
Probably another really easy way, depending on what level of LCA experience you have, is just to play around with a tool. There's different levels of different tools. If you're an ISAP, I think you have access to the ISCA IS Materials Calc. I guess you can use eTool as full-on service, or there's free LCA software out there as well, which you can literally just download and just have a go at, play around with it, learn how to do it. That's how I did it, kind of. I did it a bit at uni, but in the workplace, you just kind of have to give it a crack and learn from your own personal mistakes as well. So
yeah, just do it, guys. Just try it. I think that's the message, and don't be afraid of it. Our training is only 8 hours, so it's one day and you're fully equipped. And for universities, we actually provide free license, so that it's a little contribution for the future gurus. So thanks so much everyone for this session. Really appreciate your interest, and hope you enjoyed it. It was informative for you. And now go to your managers and say you need eTool, right?
Please thank Maria, eTool, and the panel.